Coming up on today's show, Deion Sanders pitched a new idea for spring games. You got a lot of teams out there moving more away from the spring games because of, possible tampering out there. So we're going to talk about what Deion Sanders had to say on today's show, kind of how it relates to Alabama and if they would choose to go that route. Now, Alabama is still having their spring game, still having A-Day. It's just not going to be televised this year. So let me know, are you guys going to go to A-Day in person? Let me know in the comments section by spamming me for me down there right now. Colorado head coach Deion Sanders is pitching a new idea for Colorado to play another team during their spring game and also to televise it on ESPN2. Now, first off, I want to say I do appreciate this idea from Deion. A lot of people are mad about a lot of teams going away from the spring game, but not anybody, including myself, has a lot of ideas out there to kind of, go a different route anyways. Now, I don't absolutely hate this idea, but, didn't we have this conversation a few years ago? A lot of people, pitched the idea for Alabama to play a team like, a UAB or a Troy, a couple years ago for the spring games. And I do think it would help in terms of, just kind of keeping things fresh, playing against somebody else instead of just going out there and seeing your own team, for 15 straight practices out there, because that does get a little stale at the end of the day. But I don't know if, I really see more pros to outweigh the cons, just by doing this. Now, I'll elaborate a little bit more on what I mean by that here in just a second, but this is what Coach Prime had to say about Colorado playing another team for their spring game. He said the spring game will be televised on ESPN2 on the 19th. We got to sell this thing out and pack this thing because the way the trend is going, you never know if this is going to be the last spring game. I don't believe in that. I don't really want to condone that. I would like to play in the spring. Actually, I would like to play against another team in the spring. That is what I am trying to do right now. To have a competitive game against your own guys just gets kind of monotonous. You really can't tell the level of your guys because, it's the same old, the same way. Everybody kind of, knows each other. Towards the end, I would like to style it like the pros. I would like to practice against someone for a few days and then have the spring game. I think the public would be satisfied with that tremendously, and I think it's a tremendous idea. I don't think it's a terrible idea, but we'll talk about some pros and cons here in just a second. So let me know here in the comment section, would you want Alabama to play another team for their spring game or just maybe some spring practices just in general? Let me know what you guys think at the pinned comment of today's video. Type Y for yes or N for no. Like I said, it's the pinned comments. That ad's going to come here on YouTube. That is totally fine. You guys can ignore it. Get down there and let me know what you guys think. All right, let's start off with some of the pros here for Alabama possibly playing a different team out there instead of their own team for a, possible spring game. First off, it is a money-making venture to be able to do this. A-Day, it's free to go to. The only money-making aspect about, going to these spring games that I could really think of anyways are the concession stands. You still have to pay security, you still have to pay the staff, and whatever other kind of expenditures there are out there for putting on an event like a spring game. Selling it to ESPN2 as well allows it to be televised. At least, allows you to make a little bit more money in the process as well, rather than just chalking it up to a net loss at the end of the year. The second thing that I want to talk about here, the quality of the game might be a little bit higher as well. That's not to say guys are going out there and just playing two-hand touch, before, but when you're going against, another team out there, there's just this added juice and adrenaline that you may not have otherwise. And you'd also be way more willing to hit a guy, I think, in my opinion anyways, from another team than you would be, hitting some of your own guys out there. A lot of times, going out there spring practice, health and just keeping guys healthy is a massive thing. And there's also always that competitive aspect, if they ain't wearing crimson, F them, right? So if you're going out there and you're playing another team, you might be more inclined to go a little bit harder, and I think the competitive aspect of that would be a whole lot better for fans. We'll continue with some more pros and cons here in just a second, but you guys can go over to Fanatics, And go to chatsports.com/Bama hoodie. They got a whole lot of Alabama gear on sale right now. You can see, some of these they've got on sale. You can get Alabama's hoodies up to 30% off right now just by going to chatsports.com/CFB hoodies. That link will be in the comments section and the description of today's show. Should also be a little clickable link over there in the corner as well. But they got a lot of solid deals going on right now. So go over to Fanatics, chatsports.com/Bama hoodie. All right, the third pro I want to talk about here, it would make the fans happy as well. Not just playing another team, but just having an A-Day or a spring game on TV just in general. You're just going out there to be able to watch spring ball. That's one thing that fans want. They, feed for that kind of stuff. You haven't been able to watch college football since December or January. You got a couple weeks off, or you got a couple months off anyways. Then you're able to, you start feeding for that football again. It's just able to, get you to that August, September time frame. And there are a ton of fans out there who don't get an opportunity to go to a game in season because of some of the costs. You got a lot of families out there. You got to buy, 4 or 5 tickets. Then you got to go to the concession stand. Maybe you have to stay another night. Those things, they just really add up. And a lot of fans aren't able to go to some of those games because of the cost. This also allows Alabama fans, to see another team. Maybe it's free. Maybe they sell tickets. Maybe it's like adults are $10. Kids 13 and under get in for free or something like that. But you kind of do have to make money to make it worth something a little bit, I think. But I do think at the end of the day, just having a little bit of something and having it be televised would, really make the fans happy. And Deion even said that as well. Now, I will say as well, credit to Alabama. At least they're still doing something. Some schools out there are just canceling their spring events, altogether and completely. And that just sucks for, the fans of those teams. And if you can't go, well, you know what? At least you can watch it on TV. So let me know what you guys think here in the comments section. If Alabama were to do this, if they were to go out there and schedule another team, whether that's a Colorado or a small school like UAB or Troy or something like that, who would you want them to play? Let me know what you guys think in the comments section of today's show. Let's look at some cons of this now, because I do think some of the cons kind of outweigh some of the pros here. First up, it doesn't fix the poaching/tampering problem. And to be fair, I think the only way to fix this is to not really have an event at all. You really think not being on TV is going to prevent another team from tampering in the spring transfer portal window? Teams, at the end of the day, they can just send scouts to sit in the stands. They can literally just throw on an Alabama polo and go all Connor Stallions mode on you. Just go up there. Nobody's going to recognize some scout or an assistant, analyst from another team in the stands, especially if they're just going out there wearing an Alabama polo. Nobody's going to recognize them. Kalen DeBoer straight up said this is why Alabama is not going to have a televised A-Day game this year, to prevent that tampering. So playing another team on ESPN doesn't really help that cause. And if this really is, your biggest worry, it's just not going to help anything at the end of the day. Number 2 here, less developmental reps. I think this is the biggest con, in my opinion. The best part, of seeing some of those spring games is seeing some of those up-and-comer guys. Guys that may have not been able to play a lot in the past so far in their career here at Alabama, but this could be their potential breakout season, and you really want to see the development of some of those guys going into next season. You get a feel of how some of those backups are coming along. I know it's kind of crazy to say because not a lot of people really focus on it, but I love watching, position groups like the offensive line and the defensive line on A-Day, because those position groups in particular, sometimes it does take a few years for those guys to develop. And one of my favorite things about college football just in general is watching some of these guys develop year after year. And unfortunately, with the transfer portal, a lot of guys leave, and you're not able to see that development play out as much these days. You got guys like Keon Keeley, Ola Salinen, William Sanders, and so many other guys as well that, you haven't been able to see a lot in the past. A-Day is a way for us Alabama fans and just college football fans in general to see the development year after year from those guys when let's just face it, maybe Keon Keeley, but Ola Salina, William Sanders probably aren't going to start this year. But it's a chance for us as Alabama fans to see just kind of, how they're coming along in terms of their, development. There's also those extremely talented freshmen coming in that we really want to be able to see. And, you're usually also splitting the team up, half and half, and you can get the most reps per person possible. That's the whole point of doing, the first team defense versus the first team offense, second team defense versus the second team offense, just to be able to get as many reps per person as possible to be able to help that development of some of those young players. You insert another team into that equation, and you're just splitting those reps in half. And I don't think at the end of the day that's going to help, Alabama's program. Really, I don't think any program, but we're talking about Alabama here. I don't think that's going to help the development of, anybody on this team. We'll continue with one more con here in just a second, but make sure you guys are subscribed right here to the Alabama Football Report. We are going to be live on Friday for our Alabama basketball watch party in the NCAA tournament. If they win that game, we'll be live on Sunday as well. If they win that game in the round of 32, we will continue to be live for all Alabama basketball watch parties for the remainder of the NCAA tournament. So come hang out with us. Do not miss out. Make sure you guys hit that sub button for me right now. All right, the third con that I want to talk about, that's, kind of an iffy one. What if you lose? Now, I think really this only applies to Alabama right now. Now, maybe there's some other teams out there that I'm not really thinking of, but when you talk about, Kalen DeBoer going into his second year here, I could just see it right now. There's a section of Alabama fan base that would undoubtedly lose their minds if Alabama went to Colorado for a spring game and ended up losing a just totally meaningless game. They'd be calling for Kalen DeBoer to be fired before the next season started. I can already see the Paul Feinbaum talking points already. You have it up there on the screen. Kalen DeBoer on the hot seat after spring game loss. I just don't want to go down that path. This is the kind of stuff that really makes me lose my mind. And it would be inevitable if Alabama lost a spring game, just a meaningless spring game, to some, smaller school out there. Maybe it wouldn't mean as much if you played like a, Georgia or something like that. But I wouldn't really see that happening anyways. I think it would be more out-of-conference teams that you would end up playing there. So, the narrative would just get absolutely out of control. So if we can avoid that at all costs, I would absolutely be fine with that. All right, my final take here. I do appreciate Coach Prime for coming up with this idea, but I don't think I would be for going down this path. I didn't mention anything, in terms of an injury risk, because at the end of the day, that could happen in any regular spring game, even if you're going up against yourself. It could easily as happen in that scenario as it could in this scenario. And to me, the biggest problem is the lack of player development in this type of situation. I want my guys to get as many reps as possible in the spring, and not to mention, who's the tougher team to play? I mean, I think Alabama's first-team offense would get a whole lot more out of playing against their own first-team defense than going up against that Swiss cheese Colorado defense at the end of the day. So while I do appreciate Coach Prime for at least tossing ideas out there, I think it would be a decent idea for Colorado, but for Alabama, I don't think it would necessarily be better than the alternative of just going out there and practicing against your own team.